Welcome, everyone. I'm Say James with Pioneer Your Life, and we're here with Adrienne, founder of She Rose and Shenanigans. This is our live podcast coming to you. We are going to be talking about bold choices, and it seems appropriate given that this is our maiden podcast. We are here, going to be coming at you weekly with new topics. We also can't wait to hear from you guys about what you're going to want to converse with us about. And topics to explore in the future. But today we are exploring the topic of bold choices. Adrienne?
Yes.
So as we explore this moving forward, really I think, Adrienne, it's appropriate as we get to know our listeners and they get to know us, we talk about why we're making these bold choices in our lives. As I was thinking about this topic today, what is it that inspires bold choices in us? Do you remember a time in your life when you just started making bold choices? Have you always made bold choices? What does bold choice mean to you when you hear it?
I've kind of gone back and forth. There have been times when I haven't made bold choices and then times when I have. And I would probably most definitely describe a bold choice as an uncomfortable one, but a necessary one.
Do you think those are always synonymous? Like, is it always necessary? If you feel that inkling to make a bold choice, is it always because it's a pertinent choice that we are to make in our lives? Or is it sometimes a bold but brazen and silly choice? I'm thinking about like the times in college, maybe, perhaps when I was a little more bold than I needed to be, and it didn't necessarily lead down the road of happiness, or because it was a meaningful choice or a choice that was more deeply inspired by life. Rather, it was a bold choice in the moment, but the next morning perhaps I was regretting it at some level. You know what I'm talking about?
That's a good point. But however, to be honest with you, I did make probably quite a few of the same bold choices, and I think at those times I've made quite a few bold choices in my life, even up into these days. And what I always do know is that behind a bold choice is an excellent learning experience.
There's the gold. Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. Because I think when we're talking about discernment, because I think that will be part of this conversation, especially as we grow older and wiser in our lives and we start learning to use discernment before actually leaping and making that decision. We get to recognize, we hear all these sayings throughout our lives, right? Like, leap and the net will appear, or you just got to do it. And even if you don't know what the outcome's going to be, you'll know on the other side. And, we get all these quibs of information and trust the process. But what does it actually mean to make a bold choice? And how do we know when the time is right to make that bold choice? I think these are fundamental questions that we all wrestle with, and that probably a lot of our listeners are going to be wrestling with as well.
That's true. So what's the question you're actually asking?
How do we know when to make that choice? What is that discerning factor? What is the quality of a meaningful, bold choice?
I think it really is kind of sitting back and I guess feeling your way through it. I mean, I can think about a lot of bold choices. One of the ones that my mother loves to remind me of is when I was traveling at the age of 19, I decided to go boar hunting with some men from Israel on the border of Lebanon. And it was just myself,
how have I not heard about this?
one other girl, and it was like 7 guns, 4 men, 2 dogs, and nothing but trees. I mean, we could have, many many awful things.
I was going to say, all sorts of things could have gone wrong there. Yes.
But I do remember prior to making that choice, I do remember facing her, and it was quite funny because her name was Adrienne also. And I remember facing her and just looking at her, and she was like, should we do this? Should we do this? And I realized she's thinking too much. I just kind of went, you know what? I have to check with my gut. Is this going to be an awful learning experience or not? I knew that there was risk involved. I was very aware of the risk. But it didn't, I had to really sink and ground myself and kind of play out, okay, what does this really feel like? I do think that there are those times in your intuition and everything when you can tell that something is awkward. It's just whether or not you're listening.
Yeah. Well, I wrote down thinking too much as you were speaking, because I think there is that, there's a fine art to learning how to be present enough in ourselves where we can really feel it in our body, feel that go time, that moment of activation. And not only is it feeling it, of course, it's being able to trust it and go with it. Because, there's been so many times I can look back on where I'm like, dang, why did I not just trust my gut? And I know I've had this conversation with numerous people throughout my lifetime that, it's like looking back in hindsight, you're like, I felt that. I knew that. I knew that was a yes. I knew that was a no. I knew that was an opportunity that had I moved forward and made that bold choice in that moment, something would have been radically different today, right now, where I'm standing.
Well, and I think that's what actually makes the choice bold.
Is being able to activate in the moment when you feel it, when it's that knowing.
Is when you're actually feeling,
Yeah, touche.
Because usually if you are, I think a lot of times if we're thinking through things and we're able to analyze it all and whatever, it doesn't feel so bold at that point. The bold choice is actually going with literally the gut.
Yeah.
And it's funny because when I started, I kind of stepped out a little bit. I mean, we have the mother's instinct and mother's intuition, but all through, a lot of the early child rearing years, I really did stop paying attention to intuition. And it was, it might have just been because I was just so busy with other things, with crying kids and whatever. But I remember starting to re-practice it, and it would come down to the most minute, simple details, such as move that glass of water right now because it's going to fall.
Yep.
In the next 5 minutes. And then I wouldn't move it. I'd go, no, it's fine. And I wouldn't move it, and it would fall. And this kept happening to me, over and over again, where I would hear this little voice that was like, you need to adjust this because it's not going to work. And then finally, I just went, you know what? Every little thing that voice tells me, I'm going to actually now start choosing to do, and we'll see which one works better.
Yeah. I love that. Mine's been my life has been kind of a fine line of finding balance and honoring that voice, and also resting into that voice, listening, being curious about it, observing it, and then choosing whether I should activate or not. Because my personality is very spontaneous. I activate pretty quickly. And so I know some people, in the past, I haven't thankfully heard this word in a while in relationship to myself, but in the past I've heard things like, you can be really impulsive, Lindsay, you can be really fast-paced, or you don't always think through things completely. And so I think at some level that stunted my intuition as well as my ability to activate.
Right.
But from where I stand now, I've spent a good portion of the last 5 to 7 years probably very literally trying to learn how to find a balance between exercising the muscle of action and intuition, that kind of marriage there of, okay, I feel it, I know it, it's time to go. And and really also giving it a moment or two to really sit back with it and sit with it, and sometimes overnight it or give it a week, because as a small business owner, I'm absolutely a visionary. I get inspiration and I get bold, big maps that have lots of plans and lots of facets and arms and channels to it. And I can see, a big vision. I mean, like I said, I'm a visionary. And back when I was beginning my business, what I did not have was the ability to recognize so what I'm really trying to say is when my visions used to come to me, I thought that meant implement now, go now.
Right.
And what I've learned in hindsight, and especially after laying down my first version of my business, which at the time was, Soul Inspired Wellness, was that just because a vision came to me or a knowing came to me or that intuition was activated in me, it did not mean implement now. And so I think as we're talking about bold choices, we are both encouraging people to start listening to that intuition and that impulse, but also to be discerning, also be very careful about when is the activation code.
Right. Yes. Yeah. I don't know. I think a lot of people probably would have assumed in my past that I was impulsive, but I've actually always been pretty meticulous. So I don't know that I
tell us more about meticulous.
I get what you're saying, but I can't say that I've necessarily always acted that way. It's always been something that I've felt it and I've kind of sat on it and I've kept feeling it, and when that feeling still remains and stays and then grows stronger and stronger, then at some point it is okay, now it's time to act.
You're reminding me of something as you say that. So back when I really started saying yes to life in a radical way, which was probably about 2011, 2012, somewhere around there, when these inspirations for business and really starting to share my voice and the wisdom that was moving through and just really writing and opening a lot of these creative centers in me. I was so flooded with information and inspiration and new teachers and knowledge and peers, and just life was speaking to me at such a high level. I almost felt like I was going to short circuit. And so I started this thing where anytime my intuition was really humming, because it was doing it at such a high frequency, at such a high regularity, that I started asking it to knock 3 times. I was like, okay, listen, I am getting so much inspiration right now that if this is something that I am to do something with, or that I am to share in the world, or that I am to run with, or this is an idea that you're asking Lindsay to champion, knock 3 times, please. And
I like that.
It helped tremendously in terms of what to pick up and put down. Because I think at some level, when we open ourselves to creativity,
it floods.
It floods, and we hear inspiration in every conversation we have with a person. We hear it in the radio. We hear it on the songs we're listening to. We hear it in the articles that we're reading. It's everywhere. And so I had to get to a point where I was like, all right, once it circles around the 3rd time, then I'll know that this is a bigger thing to pay attention to and something to really start thinking about and considering making a bold choice around.
Right. Yes. Perfect. I like that knock 3 times thing. But yeah, that's kind of always been, I guess, my way of doing it. I'm a Taurus. I like to, I'm a cow. I sit and I chew cud for a while, and
you're a grazer.
I do. I graze on things before I, but I feel them, I know that the feeling's there, and then I kind of weigh the options, and then I feel it again, and then I kind of think, okay, where do I really want to go with it? And then I feel again, and then, and then at some point it goes, okay, I feel pretty set up, here, and now it's time to act. I've got another friend of mine that I was talking to, and it was before I started the She Rose and Shenanigans, and I had told her that I had been thinking about it for, about 5 years or whatever and stuff. And I finally kind of was being just drawn to it a whole bunch more. And I mentioned something to her about wanting to write a book. It's not really a book. It's kind of a little bit more like a manual. Sometimes I think that a lot of the books out there are just really thick. But
you're doing the Cliff Notes.
She didn't, she was kind of like, okay, here's business plan and whatever. And I've just had, I've started businesses up in my past with dance studios and stuff that once I just decide to go, I just decide to go. So I wrote it last night, and I think I have like maybe my conclusion left. I don't know what that's called at the end of a book. I probably should study that.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I'm excited to read that. I can absolutely relate to that process. A lot of the time, even I'm thinking way back, like when I was young, and my process with learning even, some people needed to study, start writing it now, come back to it later, write it again, do it a little bit more now, and finish it up. And I was always that person who kind of gathered information along the way, but in more of an informal process. And then I sat down and I busted out like this incredible, fully comprehensive, flowing, articulated version of whatever it was that I was being asked to do. And a lot of people were always like, that is so irresponsible to wait until the last minute and sit down and write your whole paper. But that's how, but I think that was, looking back now, and here's what I want to be clear that we are not saying to people. This is not the only way. What I was able to do was look at my process and recognize that was my design. The way I acquire information is through immersion. I'm absolutely an experiential learner. So the traditional process of slow and steady and, start writing a draft and then come back to the draft and then edit the draft and then edit the draft and then edit the draft. That was not my process. That was not my design. I do know some people who are incredibly successful with that. So I think what we're really encouraging, and all of our friends here that we're speaking with, is to not only figure out what your own design is and what your own process is, but once you discover that, to then feel comfortable enough in it to be able to activate yourself when at the pace and through the process that's most efficient and productive for you.
Right. It's funny when you're saying that too, because I do notice that one of the things, even when I'm putting out videos, or even, last night when I finished writing, that because we've been so trained, or at least our generations have been so trained to, write and then edit and proofread, all that kind of stuff, there are times when I almost am like, you know what, if I keep analyzing this video too much, I'm actually not going to put it out.
Yep.
So at this point, I basically watched them one time real quick. I put a little fade in, fade out, and then it's out there because I know that while I'm delivering the information, I know that there's a flow to it. I know that it's coming, and I know that I'm in, a different realm where it's just flowing at that time.
Absolutely.
And if I go back and try to really dissect how many times did I say the word or how many times did I look at the camera wrong, or was my lighting totally perfect, I know that I won't have it. And I have done that. There are so many videos that I've gone back to actually redo, and that first one is always the best because it just, like, all the information just kind of came out.
Yep.
And then when I go and try again, then I'll look at it and go, oh man, I totally missed this whole segment that I wanted to talk about, which I suppose I could go through and pull from different things, but I do think that there is something unique about just being raw.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because as we're talking about this, in my time, I've done lots of, I did I dabbled in kind of all of it when I was doing my business, and it was the videos and the recordings, and I taught courses online and everything else. And oftentimes when I would come back to it, a period of time later, the first time I would revisit it, I was like, wow, I oftentimes I was speaking ahead of myself, and what I mean by that is whatever was flowing through me in that period of time was something. It was I was speaking to myself in the future, if that makes any sense. And so when I would hear myself later, it would resonate so deeply, and I'm like, wow, I was already experiencing that, talking about that, moving through that. But sometimes when I would listen to it, a few times after that to try to start doing some editing or see if I could pull out content or if there's something I could write about. After I listened to it a few times, that's when I started to go into that mode of really breaking it down instead of letting it be and create the impact that it did when I initially interacted with it. You know what I mean?
Right.
And it wasn't until that third or fourth time that I would really start to break it down and try to pull it apart and try to turn it into something that it wasn't. It wasn't intended for that. It wasn't even built for that time. And so I started to learn that a lot of my content, while it may hit me or others at different times in different ways, and of course I always encourage people to only take what resonates. And what resonates today may not tomorrow, and vice versa. But it was the repeated ingestion of it, trying with the intention of pulling stuff out or editing or something, that really started to make it deteriorate for me. And so I think as we're making choices, and coming back to that topic, at the beginning of our conversation, thinking too much, I think once we get to that point where we are overthinking our choice at hand, or we are overthinking that conversation that we had or didn't have, or that interaction with a colleague or a lover or a family member or whomever, that's when we really get stuck and lost in the process. That's when we really jump on the hamster wheel. So really, in essence, I think, coming back to the core topic today of bold choices, it's about being able to be as present as possible, really, and being able to
feel,
to navigate and to feel what is going on in that moment. And, is this the time to say that thing that I need to say to that person? Is this the time to put that up, to pick that up,
Right.
And being able to ask those questions.
And it's important to really know that if you are practicing the listening of that, and if you are doing your best to remind yourself to come back to that presence, you will know when it's the time. And I can't tell you how many times when I'm making these videos, or even just talking to somebody, I get so pushed toward doing it. I'll get kind of out of the conversation and I'll get quiet or something for a couple of days. I'll go into my own little space inside and peace out and whatever. And then I will suddenly just be like, nope, it needs to happen now. It needs to happen now. It needs to happen now. And when I'm listening, it's almost like I can't even do anything else because it's being called so clearly.
Yeah. And I think for creatives particularly, and this applies to anyone again, but I know myself as a creative, honoring the cycle of creation, right? Because there used to be lulls in my creativity where I'm like, dude, I don't have anything to say. I don't have anything to write.
Right.
And, you're in that really yin period where you are just completely introverted and feel completely uninspired as well as uninspiring. And I think, learning to recognize that there is this cycle of creation, just like there's the seasons and cycles of life.
Yeah.
We are not meant to always be outputting. There's a time for us to learn, and there's a time for us to take wisdom and knowledge and information in, and there's a time for us to put it out and really integrate that new information into our reality and into our life choices. And so I think that's the other thing that's part of this conversation, really, really realizing when it's a good time to leap, and when it's a good time to make those bold choices, and when it's a time to really sit back and trust the process and the flow. And if it's not there and you're not feeling inspired to move,
if
or
it's
feeling
not
pushed,
knocking 3 times,
don't do it, right? Because gosh, I look back at some times where I'm like, man, if I would have just waited like 3 hours or 2 days, or I should have done that a week earlier or a week later.
Right.
It really, timing is a big part of choice making. And, no one's gonna, I shouldn't say that. I was about to say no one's gonna die for making a bad choice. That is absolutely possible, right? But the likelihood that we will not, as you say, have an opportunity to learn something wonderful ultimately, even if it's ugly, dirty, messy, raw, and
right,
unwanted, unwelcome in the beginning, is not likely. Anything that we do, we have an opportunity on the other side of it to look back and be like, whoa, all right, what the heck just happened? What was my role there? What could I, how could I, what happened there? So,
right.
I think that's the other thing to really hammer home is fundamentally, we are all safe to make choices. It may not be the ideal time. It may not be the ideal way, but we have the opportunity to learn. And if we can trust that I used to always say it's like a muscle, you got to exercise it, and you build your muscle through exercising. So learning how to choose our intuition.
That's really what sorry, just to cut in here. That's really what I feel when a lot of people that I have conversations with, I think that is what gets missed the most. Because I think a lot of people are doing a lot of brain exercises. They're buying books, they're reading information, but they're not always exercising the practice.
Yes.
Of it. They're not always exercising the practice of feeling, the practice of vulnerability, the practice of sharing, the practice of bold, the practice of discomfort. And the more that you practice those things are bold in nature. Like I said at the beginning, there's something slightly uncomfortable about bold.
Yeah.
And when we can practice, the various ways to exercise that muscle of discomfort and be okay with it, and know that, the world's not going to fall apart.
Yeah.
And that's when we start moving.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. And I specifically remember, not day or time, it's not about the timestamp whatsoever, but I do remember when it started, that uncomfortableness that would rise, that self-doubt and all that programming, and all those voices and all the yuck that was inhibiting me from actually being able to activate and do what I knew I needed to do and what my intuition was telling me to do. I remember when it started to shift from fear and like uncomfortable discomfort to this kind of invigorating discomfort. And it was a big shift, and it was like, okay, this feels a little bit, but I also know that this is really radical and this is really awesome. And the reward on the other side is that I will have more life force, I will have more energy, I will have more stamina, I will have more confidence, I will have more truth and trust and faith and self and others, and just the return on energy, pure energy that we get back from life when we make these choices is profound. And I think that only came through continuing to push through that boundary. And I think it's really important to say, because I remember being the woman who listened, learned, but didn't quite have the confidence to do anything. Yeah, So I remember that time, and I think that it's so easy for us as listeners or observers or people who are in that learning space or in that not quite broken through but heading towards a breakthrough space or wanting, or I think about and I'm not going to knock on religion, and we don't need to come back to it, but for me personally, just quickly, I grew up in the Bible Belt, in a place where I was told what to think, what to expect, how to behave. I was taught to look outside myself for the wisdom of my life and for the choices.
Right.
I was not taught to be embodied. I was not taught to ask myself and be curious about myself. I was not taught to trust myself. It was all outside, outside, outside. And so I think as a woman, and I think this applies to any gender, non-gender, binary gender, whatever you identify as, but if you are in a culture, and I think at some level all of us grew up in a culture that asked us to look outside of ourselves for something, most things, if not all things, finding our way back to center, finding our way back to that inner knowing that allows us to have the grace and the fierce confidence that's required to make these bold choices. I mean, that's a long road. You have to claw your way back. So as we're talking about this, I think it's important that we honor that process, right? We're not saying that this happens overnight. This is truly a journey back to self.
No, I mean, mine was actually quite different than yours, and I know that most people's are actually like yours. I lucked out in one little brief scenario where I do remember we would attend church, and I remember coming home and I'd ask my mother questions and everything. And I remember one Easter, I think it was seventh or eighth grade, she actually gave me an Easter basket full of various religious perspectives, and I just started reading from there. And I
tell me more about that. Do you mean just lots of different, like a micro class on Easter on world religions kind of thing?
No, I mean, it was like some heavy duty books. Like, I know for sure that the Bible was obviously in there. Then there was what else? The Celestine Prophecy was, at that time, was like, whoa, there were a couple, I want to say Illusions might have been in there. There were a few different books that were just, self-exploration books, basically, that kind of went, and then later, when starting my dance studio, my yoga teacher didn't show up. So I had to right quick learn yoga. And this was before it became even as big as it is in the U.S. So I didn't have a lot of that. I moved out from my parents. I moved to Florida when I was 20 years old. So I kind of broke a lot of that tell me what to do thing. But at the same time, I didn't really feel like I knew what to do. I just felt like I had to figure it out.
Oh, yeah. Oh, gosh. I'm reminded of, I grew up in Oklahoma, and I mean, you obviously know that, but speaking to everyone else, my mom, I was in a college town, and a lot of my friends and peers at the time were going to one of the state colleges, and I remember for a short period of time I was like, yeah, I'm gonna go there too. And at the time, my mother said, well, that's fine. If you want to stay in state, that's absolutely fine, but you're going to have to pay your own way. I will, however, pay for you to go to college out of state. And I remember at the time just feeling so, oh my gosh, Mom, I can't, why would you do that to me? And my young self just couldn't understand why she was willing to throw me out of the nest in such an aggressive way. And in hindsight, I've told this story to so many travelers along the way as I'm, sharing my profound appreciation for that decision my mom made. Because what she was saying, in essence, was, I trust you. yes, you're going to fuck up, but I trust you to navigate that process, and I'm home.
Spread your wings, bro.
Yeah. And I remember specifically, it was pretty cool. And when she dropped me off in the dorm, my freshman year of college, I was barely 18 because I was a June baby, and had felt pretty tightly wound in my Oklahoma upbringing. And so to go states away to Colorado and just really open in a brand new environment where I knew pretty much no one, was a really wild experience. And what my mom said to me that first day was, I've given you everything I possibly could, and all I can do is trust that you're going to make the best choices possible and do the best that you can, and that you know where to find me. And I just remember thinking, wow, all those things I thought about you growing up with you, I feel radically different in this very moment, Mom. Like, thank you for doing that. And something shifted in me when that trust was given to me. And that doesn't mean I didn't fall flat on my face 1,001 times since then. But, that ability and that desire for her to let go and let me do what I needed to do. And, we've talked a lot over the years about that process between a parent and a child, and any relationship dynamic where there's a caretaker and someone being cared for, the ability to really let people go, to make those choices, to learn when we need to let go and let the process and let the wisdom that has been infused into their life through the way we've loved them or the way we've guided them. And you and I are both mothers now, and that's been a trip, and at different seasons and cycles with the children, just like they had to do with us, but I think when we bring it back to ourselves again, because this conversation really is about how to do that personally for us. And I think the more we can, as adults and humans and parents and lovers and partners and sons and daughters and sisters and mothers, the more we can be who we are in all these relationships around us, the more we not only are modeling that ability to trust ourselves and to make these choices, but in essence, it gives others permission, even if it rubs them the wrong way initially, because they're like, oof, and the subconscious is such a wild thing, I think a lot of people in the beginning, I remember, and I don't know if I would love to hear your experience with it, Adrienne, but in the beginning, when I started to really start exercising that muscle, and I really started to assert myself, and I really started to make these bold choices that were confusing to others at times, or that were unfamiliar just because Lindsay was no longer being the really sweet pushover, people really had a reaction to that. And sometimes it was positive, but sometimes it wasn't. And I got challenged a lot, and I got criticized a lot. And, I think that's a part of the process too that should be anticipated, and it's almost part of it. Like when I got to that part where I knew it was going to be invigorating, that, oh yeah, this is the invigorating discomfort. Oh, I can't wait to see what kind of knocks I get on this choice. I think that's part of the process too, is anticipating that we are going to have some resistance in the world around us, especially those who know us and have watched us as patterned behavioral beings for a long period of time.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And I must say I haven't actually received any knocks quite yet, but I definitely went into it thinking, oh my, I'm putting myself out there in a way that, I've all of the stuff that I'm doing, I've regurgitated in classes and with, coaching people, not even as a coach by profession, but just a coach in general, through dance and whatnot and yoga and everything else, and just a personal, one-on-one coach or whatever. I'm regurgitating a lot of the same stuff that I have for years, and to do it on a bigger scale you know, I know that people feel a shift, and really, I try to remember it's not necessarily criticism of what I'm doing or who I'm becoming so much as it's criticism of the shift because it's uncomfortable. They have to either move boldly with me or not.
Yes. Yes.
You know, and that shift can be uncomfortable for people because they're unsure of the step.
Yeah.
You know, and so, and it's our job or our calling to go stand on solid ground and say it's okay.
Yeah. Well, you know what was really interesting for me, fundamentally, as I was making more of these bold shifts in my life, and I'm not just talking about professionally, you know, I was talking about some of my interpersonal relationships and things like that, when I was really learning to assert myself and speak up for myself and have boundaries, really, because for a long time I was just such a peacekeeper that I was almost boundaryless. I just sort of tolerated everything and was acquiescing.
Right.
Based on the temperature of the room, you know?
Right.
But what I really discovered was, as I was making these uncomfortable choices, as I was making these bold choices, what really showed up for me more than anything was safety. And that was, I think that is the gold nugget here too, you know, that what comes on the other side of this is not just freedom and sovereignty and the ability to discern and be more bold and fierce in your own life, but you truly develop this safety.
But it's an internal rooted safety.
Indeed. Yes. It's like dropping roots, really. It's like your roots get deeper and you just get sturdier and you just get more self-assured, and
it's not a safety from anywhere else.
Yes, and that's the thing that I really have loved most about it, is I recognize that in honoring self, it really creates more protection around me. And the more I started to learn that, I'm like, oh, this makes this a lot easier to face, and this makes this
and the boundaries become more clear as to, okay, I'm willing to accept this in my life. And you know, kind of not walls necessarily, but I'm this is what I'm attracting, and this is what I'm saying no to.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I can say no without reason. I can say no without an excuse. I can just simply say no.
Indeed. Well, my dear, I think this was an awesome conversation tonight, and I am so glad that you and I have both been fortunate enough to be supported and loved in ways that have allowed us to make bold choices in our lives, and that we've also learned to give that to ourselves, because that really is the conversation.
Yeah, we both had a couple times in there.
Yeah, I know. And, you know, we intimately know about the intricacies of and challenges that we've faced personally and otherwise. And so it is not without saying that life is hard. It is fucking hard, people. And it is not always pretty, and it's not always clean, and it's not always righteous, and it's not always designed to feel good. It just isn't. That's just not how this goes. You know, it's a school of hard knocks. But the more that you can learn to make these bold choices, the more that you can stand up for yourself, and the more that you can explore the interiority of you.
And the easier it becomes.
The easier it becomes to take all this on, and the easier it becomes to face the storms and the shadow and all of the discomfort that comes with a dynamic and full life. So I guess that's what we're talking about. Well, again, this is Say James with Pioneer Your Life, and Adrienne of She Rose and Shenanigans, and we will be back at you guys weekly talking about all sorts of things. Feel free to comment in any of our avenues that this goes out, or email us about topics you'd like us to discuss in the future. And in the meantime, we'll keep pondering and wondering and being the wanderers that we are, and bringing it your way.
Bye.